You ever come home expecting life to finally slow down, only to realize somebody else has been making decisions about your property while you were gone? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And the craziest part wasn't that a stranger parked something in my driveway. It was that after getting caught, warned, and confronted multiple times, he kept doing it anyway, like he genuinely believed there would never be consequences. My name's Ryan Mercer, and this whole thing started in a small town outside Lexington, Kentucky. Back in 2022, I bought a modest little corner property on the edge of town. Nothing special from the road. White siding, small front porch, a few maple trees that dropped way too many leaves every fall. Most people would have looked at it and kept driving. But I loved it. Not because of the house, because of what it represented. For nearly 12 years, I'd worked contracts that kept me moving from place to place. Temporary apartments, temporary addresses, temporary routines. Every year felt like I was living out of a suitcase. That property was the first thing in a long time that actually felt permanent, especially the driveway. Now I know that sounds ridiculous. Nobody gets emotional about a driveway, but this one stretched almost 80 feet alongside the house. Wide enough for my pickup, my work trailer, and whatever project I happened to be working on. Every time I pulled into it, I felt like I was parking inside a future I was finally building for myself. For about a year, life was quiet. My younger brother Ethan lived 20 minutes away and stopped by whenever he felt like raiding my refrigerator. My neighbor across the street, Mrs. Holloway, spent most afternoons watering flowers she clearly cared more about than most people. It was the kind of neighborhood where everybody knew each other's dogs before they knew each other's names. Then work sent me overseas for 7 months. Nothing unusual, just another assignment. Before leaving, I asked Ethan to check on the place every week. Don't worry, he told me while helping load boxes into my truck. If somebody sneezes near your property, I'll know about it. At the time, I laughed. A few months later, he proved he wasn't joking. One Tuesday evening, my phone rang. I looked down and saw Ethan's name. Now, Ethan almost never calls. He's a texter, the kind of guy who'll answer serious questions with a thumbs-up emoji. So when I saw his name lighting up my screen, I knew something was wrong. I answered, "Everything okay?" There was a pause. Then he asked, "You buy a boat?" I laughed. "What? A boat?" I sat up in my chair. "No." Another pause. That's what I figured. The way he said it immediately got my attention. "What happened?" "There's a fishing boat sitting in your driveway." At first, I thought one of my buddies had left it there. Then Ethan explained it had been sitting there for nearly a week. Not moving, not leaving, just sitting there like it belonged. A couple days later, he checked the security cameras I'd installed before leaving. What he found was even stranger. Around 11:30 one night, an old pickup truck backed into my driveway. A man stepped out, unhooked a fishing boat, left it right there, then drove away. No hesitation, no confusión, no attempt to hide, like he was pulling into his own property. "You know who it is?" I asked. "Yeah." "Who?" Ethan sighed. "The guy 3 houses down. The one with the green shutters." I knew exactly who he meant. His name was Carl Dawson, mid-50s, always working on old engines. Never particularly friendly, but never openly hostile either. At least that's what I thought. "So what did you do?" I asked. "I went over there." Of course he did. That was Ethan. Apparently he knocked on Carl's door and pointed toward my driveway. "That your boat?" Carl shrugged. "Yep. You need to move it." Another shrug. "Just temporary." Then Ethan explained that I was overseas and the property wasn't available for public storage. That's when Carl smiled. Not an embarrassed smile. Not an apologetic smile. The kind of smile people wear when they think they're getting away with something. Then he said 5 words neither of us would forget. "He's not even here." When Ethan repeated that sentence to me, something shifted inside my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Because those 5 words weren't about a boat. They were about permission, about entitlement, about somebody deciding that my absence somehow canceled my ownership. Carl eventually moved the boat the next morning. Problem solved. Or at least that's what we thought. Because 2 weeks later, Ethan called again. And this time, before he even spoke, I already knew exactly what he was going to say. "The boat's back." And that was the moment this stopped being a misunderstanding and became a challenge. "The boat's back. I remember staring at the wall of my temporary housing unit after Ethan said those words. For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. Not because it was funny, because it was so unbelievably stupid. A grown man had already been confronted once. He'd already been told the property wasn't his. He'd already moved the boat. Most people would have taken the hint. Carl apparently wasn't most people. Same spot. I asked. Exactly the same spot. That bothered me more than I expected. Not because of the boat itself. Because of what it represented. It felt deliberate. Like somebody walking across your lawn every day after you've asked them not to. Not because they need to, but because they want you to know they can. I told Ethan not to do anything crazy. Just go talk to him again. Ethan laughed. You really think talking's gonna fix this? No. Then why am I talking to him? Because I don't need my brother getting arrested while I'm 3,000 miles away. He couldn't argue with that. So he went back. Later that night, he called me and filled me in. Carl opened the door before Ethan even knocked twice. Apparently, he already knew why someone was there. The boat's back, Ethan told him. Yeah, that was it. Just yeah. No explanation. No apology. No attempt to pretend it happened accidentally. You need to move it. It's only for a few days. You said that last time. And I moved it, didn't I? That line stuck with me. Because technically he wasn't wrong. But there are people who use logic to solve problems, and people who use logic to avoid responsibility. Carl belonged firmly in the second category. According to Ethan, the conversation ended with a warning. Ryan's coming home eventually. Carl smirked. We'll see. When Ethan told me that part, I sat there for a long time thinking about it. We'll see. Not sorry. Not won't happen again. We'll see. It wasn't about storage anymore. Somewhere along the way, this had become a game. The boat disappeared again the following day. Then everything went quiet. For nearly 3 months. Long enough that I stopped thinking about it. Long enough that I convinced myself Carl had finally figured out he was being ridiculous. Then my assignment ended. I landed back in Kentucky on a cool September afternoon. The drive home felt amazing. You know that feeling when you've been gone too long and suddenly everything looks familiar again? The roads, the gas stations, the trees, even the smell of the air. By the time I turned onto my street, I was smiling. And honestly, everything looked perfect. The house looked exactly the way I'd left it. The grass was trimmed. The porch was clean. The driveway was empty. I remember laughing to myself. Maybe the whole thing really was over. Maybe Carl had finally gotten the message. Maybe people were right when they said most neighbor disputes disappear if you ignore them long enough. Yeah, that theory lasted about 12 days. Because one Saturday afternoon, I came home for the hardware store and nearly drove straight into the boat. There it was, parked dead center in my driveway, like some kind of monument to bad decisions. I shut off the truck and just stared through the windshield. I wasn't shocked. Not really. What I felt was disappointment. Because now I knew. Without question. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't convenience. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Carl knew exactly what he was doing. I got out of the truck and walked directly to his house. No anger. No jitting. Just purpose. He answered the door almost immediately. The moment he saw me, I caught a flash of recognition. Oh, he said. You're back. Yeah. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I nodded toward my driveway. That yours? He glanced past me. Yep. Same answer. Same shrug. Same attitude. I pointed toward the boat. That's private property. It's only for a few days. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe he was still using the same line. You've been saying that for months. And I've always moved it. There was again. The world's dumbest defense. I stepped slightly closer. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just making sure he understood I wasn't leaving. Listen carefully, I said. I'm asking you one time. Move it and don't bring it back. For a brief second, I thought he might actually understand. Then he tilted his head and smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind people where when they're convinced they hold all the cards. We'll see. There it was. The same phrase. The same challenge. The same arrogance. He moved the boat that evening. A week passed. Then another. And one Saturday morning, I stepped outside holding a cup of coffee and found myself staring at the exact same boat in the exact same spot. I stood there for probably 30 seconds. No anger. No frustration. No urge to argue. Because suddenly everything became very simple. Up until that moment, Carl believed something. He believed every consequence ended with a conversation. He believed every violation ended with another warning. He believed I'd keep playing the game. And that's when I decided the game was over. I went inside, set my coffee down, picked up my phone, and called a towing company. The dispatcher answered. I explained the situation. Private property, unauthorized trailer, need it removed. She asked for the address. I gave it to her. How soon can somebody get here? About 45 minutes. Perfect. I hung up. Then I waited. The strange thing about making that decision was how calm I felt. No confrontation. No debate. No drama. Just action. 40 minutes later, I heard the diesel engine before I saw the truck. A large tow rig rolled slowly down the street and turned into my driveway. The driver climbed out. Middle-aged guy. Sunglasses. No wasti motion. He looked at the boat. Looked at me. That the one? That's the one. Within minutes, chains were attached. The trailer lifted. And just like that, the boat left my property. I watched it disappear down the road. Part of me wondered whether I'd just solved the problem. Another part suspected I'd just started a war. A few hours later, I got my answer. There was a hard knock on my front door. I opened it. Carl was standing there. Face red. Jaw tight. Eyes furious. Where's my boat? No greeting. No small talk. Straight to business. It's been towed. For a moment, he simply stared. Then reality hit him. You had my boat towed? I did. His voice immediately got louder. Are you serious right now? I leaned against the doorway. You parked it on my property. You could have warned me. That one actually made me laugh. Not loudly. Just enough. I did warn you. His face tightened. It was temporary. You've been saying temporary for 6 months. For the first time since I'd met him, Carl didn't have a comeback ready. Because this wasn't about words anymore. This was about money. Tow fees. Storage fees. Time. Inconvenience. All the costs he'd spent months trying to push onto somebody else. Now, they belonged to him. He turned around and walked away without another word. For 2 weeks, everything stayed quiet. No boat. No confrontation. Nothing. Then one Tuesday morning, I opened my curtains and immediately started laughing. Because parked in my driveway, once again, was Carl's boat. And this time, I didn't even finish pouring my coffee before picking up the phone. Good morning, the dispatcher answered. It's me again. There was a brief pause. Then she laughed. The boat guy. The boat guy. And that was the beginning of something neither of us could have predicted. Because the second tow wasn't the last. It wasn't even close. The second tow happened without much drama. The third one happened even faster. By the fourth tow, the dispatcher recognized my voice before I finished saying my name. And by the fifth, the tow truck driver started waving when he pulled onto my street. At first, it felt ridiculous. Then it became surreal. Every time Carl parked that boat in my driveway, I make a call. Every time the truck arrived, the boat disappeared. Every time Carl paid the fees, he'd eventually bring it back. It was like watching somebody repeatedly touch a hot stove and act shocked when it burned them. The strangest part was that nobody could figure out why he kept doing it. A few neighbors started talking. Mrs. Holloway claimed Carl was too stubborn to admit he was wrong. Another guy down the street thought Carl genuinely believed the driveway should have been community space because it was wider than everyone else's. Ethan had his own theory. He can't stand losing. Honestly, I think Ethan was closest to the truth. Because after a while, this stopped being about parking. It became about pride. And pride can make smart people do incredibly dumb things. Tow number 6 happened when Carl tried getting clever. Instead of parking the entire trailer in my driveway, he left half of it hanging over the property line. Like somehow trespassing became legal if you only did 50% of it. The tow driver walked around it, scratched his beard, and laughed. Half counts too. 10 minutes later, the boat was gone. Tow number 7. Tow number 8. Tow number 9. By then, the whole neighborhood knew the story. Kids riding bicycles would slow down and point whenever the boat showed up. People walking dogs would glance at my driveway and immediately know what was coming next. Then came number 14, and that's the one people still talk about. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. Carl was hosting some kind of backyard gathering. Nothing huge, maybe a dozen people. Music playing, grill smoking, coolers out. The kind of get-together where everyone stands around pretending they aren't discussing everybody else's business. I came home from running errands and saw the boat sitting in my driveway again, right in the middle, like it was posing for a photograph. I didn't hesitate. Made the call. About 40 minutes later, the tow truck arrived. Slowly, very slowly, almost like fate won an audience. The driver climbed out and started hooking up the trailer. One by one, people at Carl's party noticed. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. A couple guests actually walked toward the sidewalk to get a better look. Then Carl came charging out of his backyard. What the hell is going on? The driver didn't even look up. Private property tow. Carl's eyes locked onto mine. You call them? I shrugged. You parked it there. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. You could practically feel every person at that barbecue waiting to see what happened next. But there wasn't anything Carl could do. The boat lifted. The chains tightened. And right in front of his friends, his family, and half the neighborhood, it disappeared again. That was the first time I ever saw embarrassment replace anger on his face. But somehow it still wasn't enough. Winter arrived. Snow covered the lawns. Most people were worrying about frozen pipes and icy roads. Carl was apparently still worrying about my driveway. Tow 15, tow 16, tow 17. At this point, the towing company treated the whole thing like a recurring appointment. One afternoon, the dispatcher actually said, "Tell me you don't have another boat in your driveway." I looked outside. There it was. Unfortunately, do. She laughed. I'll send Rick. Even Rick, the driver, started finding the situation funny. Tow 21 happened during a snowstorm. The kind where visibility drops and common sense tells you to stay inside. I opened my front door and saw the boat sitting under a layer of fresh snow. For a moment, I just stood there smiling. Not because I enjoyed the conflict, because I genuinely couldn't believe Carl was still doing this. An hour later, headlights appeared through the snow. Rick rolled down his window. Vote again. Vote again. Man, this guy really hates money. That line stuck with me, because by then Carl had probably spent enough on towing fees to build his own solution, which, as it turned out, is exactly what eventually happened. Tow 22 came and went. Then, tow 23. The last one. I didn't know it was the last at the time. Nobody did. A few weeks later, I noticed construction trucks parked at Carl's house. Workers measuring, digging, moving gravel, installing forms. For several days, the noise echoed through the neighborhood. Then one morning, I looked over and finally understood. Carl was building a new driveway. A big one. Wide enough for his truck. Wide enough for his boat. Wide enough for anything he wanted to park there. I stood in my yard staring at it and couldn't help laughing. Not because I hated the guy. Not because I wanted revenge. Because the answer had been sitting there the entire time. He could have built that driveway a year earlier. He could have saved thousands in towing fees. Months of frustration. Countless arguments. All he had to do was respect a boundary that never belonged to him. Instead, he spent nearly a year fighting reality. And reality won. These days, things are quiet again. Sometimes I'll see Carl outside. Sometimes we make eye contact. Usually it's just a quick nod. Nothing more. No apologies. No conversations. No attempt to revisit the past. And honestly, maybe that's for the best. Because every once in a while I'll sit on my porch, look at that empty stretch of gravel beside my house, and think about how strange the whole thing really was. It was never about a boat. Not really. It was about entitlement. About boundaries. About what happens when somebody hears no and decides it doesn't apply to them. And here's the part that still divides people whenever I tell this story. Some folks think I should have been more patient. Others think I should have taken legal action much sooner. A few people say 23 tows was excessive. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're not. But I know one thing for certain. After tow number 23, that boat never touched my driveway again. So now I want to hear from you. What would have you done in my position? Would you have started towing after the first warning? Would you have kept giving chances? Or would you have handled the whole thing completely differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this always split people right down the middle. And if you've ever dealt with difficult neighbors, property disputes, or someone who simply refused to respect boundaries, share your story too. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stick around for the next one. Because sometimes the biggest battles in life don't happen in courtrooms or boardrooms. Sometimes they happen right at the end of your own driveway.